All right, let's dive in. The world of AI is about to get a massive new rulebook, and it's coming straight out of the European Union. Today, we're going to break down the EU's pretty groundbreaking AI Act, and we're going to zero in on the one part that's set to change everything for AI developers, Article 16.
But first, let's start with a really basic question. Think about it. How does an AI system that could literally hold your life in its hands, like a self-driving car or a medical diagnostic tool, prove that it's safe before it gets anywhere near you? Well, that is the exact problem the EU is trying to solve.
So the EU's whole strategy here is to sort AI into different risk categories. And for this explainer, we are focused on the top of the pyramid, the high-risk systems. We're talking about AI that could be running our power grids, helping doctors diagnose diseases, or even deciding whether you get a job interview. The stakes, they really couldn't be any higher.
And that, right there, brings us to the absolute core of this whole thing. If you're a company building one of these high-risk systems and you want to sell it in the massive European market, then Article 16 is basically your new Bible. It's a detailed, non-negotiable checklist of everything you have to do.
But you know what? These rules didn't just appear out of thin air. Getting to the final version of Article 16 was a multi-year battle, a genuine legislative tug-of-war between some really powerful groups inside the EU. The whole process kicked off way back in 2021, but the real drama, the real friction, started in 2023. That's when the EU's two main lawmaking bodies, the Parliament and the Council, clashed. They had totally different ideas about how these rules should work, which sparked the super tense negotiation that was only just settled this year. And the biggest point of conflict really came down to this one question: who's responsible? The Parliament, on one side, argued that accountability should be shared between the AI's creator and the company that actually uses the AI. But the Council, they wanted a much clearer line. They said, nope, the buck stops with the provider, the original creator.
So, where did they end up? Well, the final compromise keeps that primary focus on the provider. That's a big win for the Council's view. But in a major nod to the Parliament, the final law massively boosted transparency and even added brand new rules on accessibility for people with disabilities. It's really a blend of both positions.
Okay, so now that we know how we got here, what does this final rulebook actually demand from the people building AI? Let's get into the concrete steps they have to take.
Here are the big ones from Article 16. This is a pretty comprehensive to-do list for being accountable. Providers have to set up quality control, they have to keep incredibly detailed documentation, log everything the AI does, get it officially safety checked, and even register it in a public EU database. Let's break down a couple of the most important ones, shall we? First up is the conformity assessment, which is basically the official safety check. And the EU created a two-tiered system here. For some AI, a company can just do its own internal check against the list. But for the highest risk systems, we're talking critical medical devices here, they have to be audited by an independent, pre-approved third party called a notified body. You can think of them as the official safety inspectors for the digital age. And once a system actually passes that tough assessment, the provider gets to put this on it, the CE marking. You've probably seen this on other products. It's essentially a visual passport that says this is good to go for the European market. It's the company's public promise that their AI meets all of the EU's really tough safety and legal standards. Which brings us to a super crucial point: accountability. See, it's not enough for an AI to just be safe. You have to know who is responsible for it. So the law says the provider's name, their brand, their contact info, it all has to be clearly visible. There's just no hiding behind some anonymous algorithm. If something goes wrong, you and the regulators know exactly who to call.
Now, all of this sounds really strict, right? And that leads to the central challenge lawmakers faced. How in the world do you enforce these tough safety rules without completely crushing the innovation that makes this industry so exciting?
The law actually gets that this stuff costs money. The requirements for documentation and audits are a really big deal. But it also tries to build in support, especially for smaller companies. There's this principle of proportionality, which basically means the rules can be a bit simpler for a startup than for a tech giant. And those smaller guys get priority access to what are called regulatory sandboxes. These are safe, controlled spaces where they can test their new AI with a lot less red tape.
And believe me, this was not an accident. This quote from the analysis of the law makes it crystal clear what the goal was. The entire regulation is a very conscious attempt to find that delicate equilibrium, that perfect balance, between pushing technology forward and protecting people.
So why does a law passed in Brussels matter to a developer in Silicon Valley or a tech company in Seoul? Well, it all comes down to this phenomenon that experts call the Brussels effect.
Okay, so the EU is one of the biggest single markets in the world, and it's often way easier and cheaper for a global company to just build one product that meets Europe's high standards and sell that everywhere rather than making a bunch of different versions. We saw this exact thing happen with data privacy and GDPR. In other words, EU rules often become the default global rules. What happens in Brussels definitely does not stay in Brussels.
And that leaves us with the big final question. With this AI Act, and with this incredibly detailed rulebook in Article 16, has the European Union just created the global gold standard for building safe, trustworthy AI? Or has it put up a huge, complex barrier that's going to slow down innovation for everyone? The answer to that is going to shape the future of technology for all of us.